So, how does an entire nation forget a war? And I'm not talking about some ancient conflict. We're talking about a brutal, 10-year-long war that ended just over 30 years ago. This is the incredible story of a war that was intentionally silenced, and the soldiers who just refused to let it disappear.
A place where death is always close at hand. Just think about that for a second. That's how a newspaper in Vietnam described the battlefield of Vị Xuyên. It is a truly chilling phrase for a place of unimaginable horror that, for decades, pretty much no one was allowed to talk about. You see, the Battle of Vị Xuyên wasn't the whole story. It was actually one part of a much bigger conflict, the Sino-Vietnamese War, which just raged on for a solid decade. But after the guns finally went quiet in 1989, the war itself fell into this different kind of silence, an official one that lasted for decades.
And the cost of that silence? It's right there, you can see it. It's starkly visible at the Vị Xuyên National Martyrs Cemetery. It's just filled with these rows upon rows of tombstones for soldiers who are still unidentified. Their sacrifice was absolutely real, but for the longest time, their story just wasn't officially told.
Now this contrast really tells you everything. It shows that this was a deliberate choice by the Vietnamese state. On one hand, you have the war in Cambodia against the Pol Pot regime. That one gets huge, high-profile state ceremonies. It's framed as a heroic intervention, a clear victory. But the war against China? For decades, it was remembered in this really subdued, quiet way, if it was remembered at all. And let me tell you, that was no accident.
So let's zoom in a little. That wider war had one chapter that was just especially brutal, the fight for the high ground at Vị Xuyên. And this wasn't just a battle. From 1984 to 1989, it was, in the words of the men who fought there, a meat grinder. And the official numbers? They're just staggering. More than 4,000 Vietnamese soldiers lost their lives fighting for these hills. Thousands more were wounded, and so many were never even found. It's a devastating loss for just one small patch of land on the border.
You know, the soldiers' own nicknames for the landscape, they revealed the sheer terror of this place. They weren't fighting on Hills 685. No, they were fighting at the meat grinder. They were trying to survive at the Death's Gate crossroads. I mean, come on, these names tell you more about what combat was really like than any official report ever could.
And you hear it in the voices of the people who were there. Veteran Nguyen Van Trung remembers just living in these rock bunkers under constant, non-stop bombardment. But the key thing he says, the part that really hits you, is this feeling of utter hopelessness. We didn't think we would survive. And for thousands of them, that was tragically true.
So why? You have to ask, right? Why was this brutal, horrifying reality just silenced? Well, the answer isn't on the battlefield. It's in the halls of diplomacy. This was basically a policy of forgetting by agreement.
Okay, this timeline is absolutely key. Look how fast this all happened. The fighting stops in '89. Then, boom, just 2 years later, in 1991, Vietnam and China normalized relations. And what came next was a political decision. Through the entire '90s and 2000s, the war was pretty much scrubbed from public view, gone from the media, gone from school books.
And let's be really clear here, this was an active policy. Research shows the state made absolutely sure that it, and only it, would control the story. So this wasn't just forgetting, it was a carefully managed silence, all designed to protect a very fragile new relationship with a former enemy.
But here's the thing, you can't just erase memory, and the people who fought and actually survived the meat grinder were not going to let their friends and their comrades be forgotten. And this is where our story takes a really interesting turn. So to understand what happened next, we need to talk about this concept, agents of remembrance. It sounds a little academic, I know, but it's really simple. It's about people and groups outside of official channels who actively work to shape how we remember the past. And the veterans of Vị Xuyên, they became the definition of these agents.
So how'd they do it? Well, it started small, really grassroots. They organized reunions, going back to the very hills where they fought. They started sharing their stories, using whatever they could, state media, and also this new tool, social media. And crucially, they started raising their own money to build memorials and to fund searches for the bodies of their friends still lost out there in the mountains.
This right here, this became their motto. It's a powerful promise, and it's now carved into a memorial they helped build. It just captures their entire spirit, doesn't it? Their lives were defined by clinging to those rocks to fight, and they believed that in death, their sacrifice should be just as permanent as the stone itself.
And you know what? Incredibly, it worked. This grassroots movement of veterans, these agents of remembrance, They successfully put pressure on the state. By the late 2010s, that official silence finally started to break, and the war began to be commemorated in a much more open, official way. But hold on. There is one final, really surprising twist to this whole story. Because while the veterans were fighting to remember the war, something completely different was happening in those exact same border regions.
It's a fascinating paradox. During that period of official silence in the 1990s, the border didn't just stay quiet. It opened up again, but not for soldiers this time. It opened up for traders, who were building a completely new kind of economic relationship.
I mean, the transformation was just incredible. The very same land, literally scarred by artillery and soaked in blood, became a hub for cross-border markets. The Death's Gate crossroads literally became a marketplace. It's wild to think about.
And that leaves us with this final, really powerful question. You know, the story of Vị Xuyên isn't just about one forgotten battle. It's about this deep, difficult tension that every nation faces. How do you honor the sacrifices of a painful war while at the same time building a peaceful and prosperous future with the very country you once fought? There really are no easy answers.